Emily Morter is an osteopath and doula based in Naarm, or Melbourne, Australia. She provides gentle and compassionate care for every body. Her holistic approach honours you as the expert on your own body with deep listening and co-creation of treatment plans that support your healing journey. Emily is a full-spectrum doula, offering continuity of care throughout preconception, pregnancy loss or abortion, birth, stillbirth, postpartum, and parenting. She works from her home studio and travels for home visits around metropolitan Melbourne. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the Whole Doula podcast. The Whole Doula podcast is a conversation space for doulas and birth workers to talk about the diverse paths that led them to birth work, as well as the diverse and unique skills, interests and offerings they bring to their birth-keeping roles. Here I dive into conversations with others who may be wondering how to bring the different aspects and experiences of their own lives into their roles as doulas in business. After all, there is more than one way to doula, and I'd love to help others see the connections between all the different parts of themselves, to see themselves as a whole doula. I am your host, Mary Giordano, doula, birth educator, counsellor, and doula business mentor, and this is the Whole Doula podcast. I hope you enjoy listening. Good morning, Emily. So lovely to have you here with me on the Whole Doula podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'd love to hear a little bit about your unique journey to birth work. So let's start there.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. So glad to be here. There are a few angles. So I think the thing that attracted me to birth work was professionally first. I wanted to provide continuity of care. So I was already practicing as an osteopath and looking after a lot of women in their kind of pregnancy, postpartum years, and really wanted to be there. And it was sort of like there was this gap. I was with them for months and months leading up, and then there was this window where I wouldn't see them for a while, and then I'd see them afterwards with their babies. And that was the initial draw card. It was like, I really want to be there for that part. And as I looked into how you become a doula and what is a doula and investigated that further, I realized in my family history and my bloodline, everyone was midwives. I'd kind of known it, but yeah. So my mum, my nana, and my great grandma, as far as we know, but possibly further, mum and nana both worked as like professional midwives. My great grandma was a lay midwife for her community. So we have stories about her tending births, tending dead bodies, being there for all of those transitions for people in her community. So I kind of had known but not known that. And then when I started that journey, that really clicked into place of like, of course I couldn't really avoid this. As much as I'd kind of gone around and studied different things, I was probably always going to come back to birth work.
Yeah, wow.
And then I think the third strand was personal. So a few years before I studied, I had an unplanned pregnancy with my current partner. So we were very grounded, and we sort of weren't ready and were shocked by it, but sort of like, we'll keep it, we're still both at uni and studying, and sort of a bit flustered and freaked out by that experience. And it made me really realize I didn't know much about the maternity system here in Australia personally. I wasn't working yet, hadn't started supporting people. So it just triggered me to gather so much information straight away of how did we want to do this, and who do you see when you first become pregnant, where do you go, what that whole system looked like. And then I started to miscarry, so started to lose that pregnancy spontaneously, and really strongly felt that I wanted to be at home. Like I didn't want to go to the hospital. I'd only ever kind of heard about miscarriages being emergencies that you had to rush, somewhere. And so that was a really beautiful, interesting experience as well, because I kind of recognized this part in me that didn't have to follow, the cultural messaging that I'd had up until that point, and that there might be other pathways. And I guess we were kind of lucky because emotionally we weren't super invested. We weren't really ready. And so it's sort of almost more relief than sadness at that time. But it really triggered this big investigation for me of what will I do next time? How do I want this to look? And so part of that was I actually want to be there and I want to become a doula. And so it was 2 years of being a doula before I had my daughter. And I needed that just as my own education and my own personal birth preparation, really.
You mean you needed those 2 years? Yeah.
Yeah, and to be there in the birth world and to witness different experiences and to actually see what the journey can look like from lots of different angles.
Amazing. So the 3 things you talked about were sort of filling the gap between the, I suppose, of provision of care that you were giving to the people you were seeing in your osteopathy clinic, and then seeing afterwards, before and after birth, but not throughout.
Yeah, the continuity.
Which is really interesting, because I'm sure there's a lot of practitioners that see people before and after birth that it wouldn't occur to them to actually, okay, well, I'm going to be there at the birth as well. How do I get there for the whole journey? But obviously, as you said, there was a calling, and one that was probably in your DNA. It's really interesting what you shared about the women in your lineage. Was that, I'm curious to know, were they in Australia, all of those women practicing as midwives, or was this?
Yeah, all in Australia. Yeah, so even my great-grandma was born here. I think it was her mum that travelled here from England. So yeah, all Australian.
Yeah. And so you said one was a lay midwife, but the rest were midwives. And do you know what settings they worked in? And did you ever get to hear any stories? Do you remember stories of them?
I'm so lucky. Yes, my nana is still alive, my mum's mum. So she's 95. And so when I started my doula work about 10, 12 years ago, I went to her straight away. I'm like, give me stuff. Give me all the stories. And it was around the time that show called The Midwife had just been created. And she was like, yeah, that was me. It was 1950s. She's like, I didn't quite ride a bike. We had a car, but they used to drive out. Like, they go out to the women's houses and do a lot of home visiting. So she described the different parts of Sydney. I grew up in Sydney. So she worked there when in the 1950s and 60s. Yeah, doing home visits and weighing babies, and she can still describe the descent and rotation. They had to learn things like quite orally in her midwifery practice. So, she can still describe all the movements that a baby takes through the pelvis, to the ideal movements anyway. Yeah, she's very sharp and amazing. So I got some beautiful stories from her. And then, it's maybe a little bit more negative from my mum. So she was working through the 70s and 80s, and she was pretty traumatized. She quit when she had, my sister's older than me, so she had 2 babies of her own, and she was like, I just can't be in the system anymore. And she moved into more like working as a school nurse, or, sort of more of the gentle career of nursing, rather than being in the system. She was very much hospital births. So they didn't get to do home visiting and stuff in the 70s and 80s. She was very much in a starched uniform with a pocket watch, like kind of more the stereotype of a nurse. Yeah. And they used to kind of shave women's pubic hair and give them enemas, and it was like really, really awful situations that she was in. And she, has nightmares still about, the sound of episiotomies, like the sound of scissors cutting into tissue. And,
oh my gosh.
And the vision of like the faces of obstetricians that just kind of clearly loved the violence of what they were doing. Like, they were sort of working in that field because they were attracted to, cutting. And I know, you can feel it. I can feel it too. I'm getting shaky just talking about it. So they were the main stories I'd had growing up. So I think that's why I took this roundabout path. I probably actually wanted to be a midwife from when I was quite young, but because my mum, my direct line, she was like, never do nursing, never do nursing. It's like, you don't want to work in hospitals. I know you're going to hate it. And she is right. Like, I don't want to be part of that system. But it took me a while to find a way to kind of heal some of that trauma, I think, and come back to it in my own way, in my own alternative way.
So I just want to say, before I come back to you just briefly, it's really shocking to hear, and it's not surprising, of course. This was the 1970s, you said, that your mum was in the hospital system and was traumatised, and not much has changed. And it's, I mean, it kind of beggars belief, really. How can we not have learned? And midwives are still traumatised in the system, and there's still, they may not be doing all of the things that they were doing then, but there's still plenty of things that are happening that are just as violent.
Violence. Yeah. And cross violence, I think, between other practitioners and each other. And the hierarchy of it is really difficult. Yeah. And why people are there in the first place. I think that's really what got to my mind. Watching people kind of enjoy the violence of it.
Wow. I've certainly experienced births where it feels, I mean, it's the hierarchy and the sort of power dynamics at play there. I haven't really thought about whether obstetricians performing episiotomies were enjoying them in that sense of, sort of that narcissistic type approach.
Mm.
I've thought about it in lots of ways, but I haven't really thought of it through that lens. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the most negative way, but I think there is like a hero, like coming in to save the day is quite a classic, even for midwives sometimes, but definitely obstetricians that I've observed. They definitely have the good intention. I haven't thankfully witnessed that level of violence, but definitely seen that they would like to be the one that swoops in and saves the day, and everybody's so grateful that they were there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little break from our conversation to let you know that I'm currently working on the Savvy Doula, an intensive business program for doulas to help you up-level your business acumen to ensure that your dream work is not just fulfilling your heart's calling, but also sustainable and financially viable for the long term. The Savvy Doula will be launching early in 2024. To express your interest, send me an email at hello@marygiordano.com.au or connect with me on Instagram at marygiordano.com.au. So how do you refer to yourself, Emily? I know you're an osteopath, but in terms of your birth work, you did say the word doula before, but you also talked about midwife. So how do you refer to yourself? How do you see yourself?
I keep it simple. So I call myself an osteopath and doula. And I remember when I first started using those terms about 12 years ago, a lot of people knew what a doula was, but not an osteopath.
Really?
And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they know what an osteopath is, but not a doula. But yeah, I think now pretty much both of those have become more well-known and more common. And I just recently have updated my website and changed to using the term full spectrum doula, just to indicate that my typical client I work with for maybe a year, possibly two. Like that's,
wow.
I'm not really a birth doula, I think is the main thing. So I usually only attend 2 births in a year, but I would be taking care of people through that year of pregnancy and birth and postpartum, maybe like 30 to 40 women in a year.
Okay. So when you talked about before wanting to fill that gap between the pregnancy and the postpartum visits, where you wanted to be at the birth as well, but you're actually not attending a lot of birth.
No, that was my initial desire when I wanted to study. Yeah, so I've reached a point through my career of like I really just attend births infrequently to kind of keep. I think it's almost a personal integrity or something. Like I sort of still want to be part of witnessing that system and understanding what women are going through. But yeah, as one person providing this kind of long, full spectrum continuity of care, I can't do a lot of actual birth. So that's just the last few years, and especially having your own child as well, that kind of shifted too. So yeah, I used to work a lot more as a birth doula initially, and that was the initial desire to become a doula. Yeah, but it's shifted over time.
Yeah, and you said you've been in this space for about 12 years now of supporting birth and the perinatal period. Yeah, beautiful. So are you based primarily in your osteopathic clinic? That's where you see people, or do you see people in their homes still?
Yeah, I do both, which, I mean, it's nice you reminded me talking about my Nana's stories that, that was kind of the original journey was home visits. And I do a lot of home visits, especially in the postpartum time. I think that's the time that it's so nice to leave the dyad of mother and baby at home in their own space and kind of shift the dynamics of how they're feeling, but then leave them at home. But I've also shifted since COVID times to working from home myself. So we have a studio in the backyard at my place in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. And so that I don't do clinic work anymore either. So I used to work in various clinics around Melbourne, but now it's a home-based studio that people come to.
Amazing.
And that's probably like 2/3 I see people in my studio, and then 1/3 is visiting people at home.
Amazing. So you're based in Melbourne, as you said, or Naarm. So what does a typical day look like for you, Emily, when you're seeing clients? And do you only service women on the perinatal journey or in that period, or are you seeing people more broadly as well in the community?
No, I'm definitely just a general osteopath. So I support a lot of my local community, especially with a child in primary school too. We've kind of met, and we've been in this place for about 8 years. So we definitely have a lot of connections. So yeah, there's men, there's women, there's old people, there's young people. People do bring babies and children to me, but I kind of make it clear that that's not my specialty, and I will refer them to pediatric osteos that specialize in that if needed. But definitely if it's part of the treatment of a parent or in particular a mother that they worry about their child, I will often do kind of duo treatments, particularly with little babies, where I'll check the baby first and then treat the mum.
But primarily you're supporting the mum rather than the baby.
Definitely. Yeah, that's my focus. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just wondering, thinking, for example, when you attend births, say you're on call, just trying to get a picture for what your day or what your week looks like in your unique role as osteopath and doula.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. There's a lot of space in my week. So I usually only work in like seeing patients in my studio during school hours while my daughter's at school. And the home visits, I usually try to fit them onto one day. So I'm kind of out and about for one day, but then if I'm in the studio, I'm in the studio. Being on call for a birth is not as much pressure as it used to be when I was doing a lot of births. So yeah, once or twice a year, that feels really different. And because I now have the flexibility of my own studio space, where I can work anytime. I can work at night, I can work on the weekends. You know, I'm not reliant on that room being available at only the times that nobody else is in it. That's allowed me to kind of make it pretty easy to sort of have to cancel a day because I've been at a birth or and just shuffle people somewhere else once I've recovered some sleep.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so wonderful when we are able to work from home and manage our schedules ourselves. Certainly a perk to working for oneself.
And I think it's part of the modelling of caring for women through this stage. It's I really feel as I get older and my child gets older, like this responsibility of modelling this way of caring for myself and caring for the community and having lots of space. That's really important to show people who are about to become parents.
To show them, and also, as you said before, to show our children as well, and then just modelling sort of, I suppose, a healthy balance that I guess a lot of us are striving for and perhaps are not always there, but being able to drop off some work during the holidays or outside of school hours and pick it up when school's on and the kids are sort of being cared for elsewhere, and sort of being able to just manage our days and work more or work less as we need to, as the needs and demands of our families change. It's something that I've been really reflecting a lot on the last few months as well, and I'm really grateful to have created that autonomy and possibility for myself. Although I do notice as well, I don't know if you would resonate with this, I do notice myself sometimes when I'm not working, so for example during the school holidays when I don't have the capacity to work as much because the kids are home, feeling a bit of frustration, like I'm not getting enough work done. But then I have to remind myself, well, why am I working for myself? It's precisely for this reason. It's because I can choose and I can adapt. But I think that patriarchy and uber productivity sort of mindset is still, personally for me, it's still there in the background at least sometimes. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that's taken many years for me too, and still a work in progress of understanding that it actually is work, like taking space and resting and proactively caring for children and, you know, all these things that look like we're doing nothing. It's actually part of our work. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot more about this, being able to really be with someone and be compassionate rather than coming in and helping and fixing. Requires us a lot of self-regulation practices, a lot of somatic, release, a lot of psychology. There's actually a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into being able to really compassionately just be with someone through these huge transitions without trying to force or influence or
Yeah, I love that. So it's sort of like, it's really essential for us as birth keepers of various kinds to intentionally and, mindfully create space to ground ourselves so that we can show up in the best way for the families that we support.
And reflect and grow and learn. And I think that's all part of the work. So I think you're asking about a typical day or week, but it's sometimes it's only, a few patients a day on 3 days of the week, and there's all this other space of journaling and going to therapy and getting a massage. That sort of seems a little bit
work.
Indulgent, doesn't it? But I actually think that I include that now. I'm starting to include that now mentally as work.
I am too, and budgeting for that as well, and sort of being creative about how I budget for that and how I account for that in my finances.
Absolutely. And that there's ways to do it without money sometimes too. I think we've talked about that. You can swap with fellow parents or practitioners or there's sort of barter systems that don't always include money.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of weave you into your community a bit more deeply.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I have a similar setup with an osteopath friend of mine here in Kyneton where I live, Isabel. You may know her.
Yeah, we know each other. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful to be able to do that, to hold each other. So I'm curious, how do you feel, how does osteopathy support the well-being of women on the childbearing continuum? How do they complement each other, your sort of work as doula and work as osteopath?
Yeah, interesting question. To me, they're almost the same thing. And I think I talk about how I work as an osteopath more like a doula now, and I doula more like an osteopath. Like they're kind of woven together. So there's a certain way of thinking osteopathically that it already is very holistic. So it's sort of looking at a person and what they're coming in to see you with as sort of a whole puzzle that you're going to work out together. Like it's very collaborative with the person, centered around their needs, but you bring in this insight and this wisdom and skill of like, have you thought about this?
Mm-hmm.
We sort of think about, it's not just structure of the body. Like it's sort of like, what about your diet? What about stress management?
Mm-hmm.
What about your relationship? And we're not going to provide all of that. We're sort of
Mm-hmm.
this touchstone of helping people think it through, I think is how I think about osteo. And I can apply that to my doula work, obviously, and to pregnant people or any person. And then I can apply this skill of doula work of just being with people compassionately without trying to fix them, to working on people's bodies as an osteopath, which has been a big change. And it's quite hard because we're taught for 5 years at uni to become clinicians and to be, kind of higher than a patient, right? Clinician and patient. And we're going to have this hierarchy of we know more about your body than you do, and we're going to tell you what to do. And so that's taken a lot of undoing. And I still obviously sometimes slip into it of kind of trying to tell someone what I think they should do to fix their problem. And so it's really lovely. And that's another reason why I sort of don't want to give up birth doula work and being in that, it really deeply involved in that world, because it reminds me every single time of this humility of we don't know, we don't know what's right for that person. And the value is just being with them through the change. And it might be a change of, a muscle release or a pain coming and going from a body, or it might be a whole birth and that whole huge journey of becoming a mother. But yeah, that's how they weave together for me.
It's beautiful. So it's a learning that goes both ways and an influence that goes both ways. It's really interesting for me to think about, as you said, as an osteopath who's trained at university for 5 years in this sort of framework of being the clinician who knows more about the body than the patient and is there essentially to heal or to do something to the patient to make them better. And that's really interesting that you've been able to bring the influence of the doula, of the non-doing, to that role. I can't really picture that, but I'm sure it's a very subtle and very intuitive approach, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And it's hard. It's not perfect. I don't say I'm 100% there all the time, but it's interesting. I have seen in the osteopathic world, there is more research and talk about the biopsychosocial model of health. And even in the medical profession now, this is starting to come in of like, we shouldn't be telling people what to do. We actually should be person-centered, and they should be telling us what this means in their life. So that research and that influence is coming from a lot of different directions, which I'm so happy to see.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing more of that as well in my interactions with various healthcare providers. Yeah, I certainly welcome that approach. So I'm curious to know, Emily, what you enjoy most about being a doula, the doula part of your business. What do you enjoy most about that?
I think we've kind of touched on it a bit. I think in some ways it's the hardest part as well. It's the humility. It's being completely humbled by birth every single time, even though I feel like I'm more experienced and I'm sort of reaching the point where the age gap between the women having the baby and me is kind of starting to grow out too, which is nice. It's nice. Yeah, I quite like it, because when I started, I was younger, and then I was kind of the same age and going through the same stage. And now I'm a little bit older and I still don't know. Like I'm always knocked to my knees and humbled by it, whether it's like such a beautiful experience or maybe a bit more challenging. Every time I learn something about myself that's what I love and also find very challenging about this work.
So the thing that you love most and that you find most challenging is the same, which is...
It's the same.
Yeah.
I really think it is. And that's the part that I still don't want to give it up, because my husband always asks me every time after a birth, he's like, do you still need to do the birth work? Like, can you just not provide, all of this beautiful continuity of care that you already do? Just because, obviously it's a strain on your family and your partner. The being on call is a lot. But yeah, I think being asked that question directly is like, yes, I do still need to do it. Even just selfishly, I guess, for me, of like, I need that humbling, I think, of being at the face of birth and then facing that unknown force that you're just kind of riding it with the woman and with the family.
How wonderful that you've created this position for yourself where you don't need to attend a lot of births each year, because your business, obviously supports itself with the osteopathic work. But you can still attend a couple to sort of keep that flame ignited and keep that passion burning. And as you said, to keep yourself humbled by the miracle and the incredible nature of birth, and being able to witness that and bring those learnings and that reminder back to your other work. Yeah, it's wonderful to be in that position. And it's lovely to think, 12 years. So did you start your whole business 12 years ago, or was it sort of would you say your business started 12 years ago?
Yeah, so I finished in 2010, finished osteo, started working from then. And then I did my doula training 2012. So I guess 11 years. Yeah. So they're kind of both woven together pretty early on.
And so what's the direction for you? Where do you see your business going? The whole business together, but obviously there's a particular interest in the birth part for our listeners who I'm thinking of people who may be considering becoming doulas, and I'll ask you in a moment as well if you have any thoughts for people who may be considering or just emerging as doulas. But first, I'd like to know where are you steering your business? Where is it going? What's your vision like for 5, 10 years or whatever the time may be?
It's not super clear, actually. I feel like I'm almost going through a little bit of a crisis, kind of existentially, I guess. Like it's sort of the feeling, like I think what I was describing of that change of focusing more on the person rather than me being a practitioner that tells, which also applies to doing the doula work I do, like focusing on, I think it's a trap, isn't it? The longer we've been doing it and the more we're experienced, people are seeking us for that experience, but that doesn't mean I'm going to come in and tell them what to do. That's kind of been tricky for me lately, that line. And so it's hard to kind of look clearly to the future with that.
That's okay.
But what I'm really feeling is, I feel like I've worked a lot with bodies, and I've started to bring in the mind and how people are feeling and that kind of birth preparation work. But I feel like there's something to do with spirit now, which was beautiful, working with Neoli, with the workshops that I did with you. And bringing that aspect in for myself, I think first, of how can I support myself spiritually, use that within my community, or I sort of almost feel embarrassing in a way to talk. We don't talk about it in our culture, right? The spirit or the spirituality very often. Yeah. And definitely within the clinical world of osteos and the medical profession. So, but I'm kind of losing that embarrassment around it. Just like, no, I really need this. And I think I need to bring it to the people that I'm working with as well. So I think maybe that's the direction. I don't know what that means or what look like. But that's what I'm curious about, moving forward into providing support from that side as well as for the body and mind.
Yeah, wow. That's so important. And I guess there are parts of our culture that are very focused on spirituality, and everyone's unique. Different families have different approaches, of course, to spirituality and different individuals. Interesting to hear you say, as a practitioner and a clinical practitioner, how there's been a sense of embarrassment to explore that, because I guess because it's not really valued within that clinical setting, generally speaking. But nevertheless, that's where you feel sort of that, that the ship is sailing and that you're wanting to focus more attention. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I do a lot of work with families as well. I don't really even know about sort of the labels of, the spiritual work or whatever. I kind of think of it as just a holistic work, and part of it may be spiritual. I'm not sure, that would mean different things to different people. But I love how, you're sort of listening to that inner knowing that that's what you want to focus on, despite it not being the overarching sort of theme of practitioners are generally approaching in your area. And I'm wondering if maybe, you talked about age as well. I think personally, speaking, at least for myself, I find that the older I get, the more confident I am on my own path, I guess, and caring less about what people think and just wanting to be true to self and just sort of on my unique journey, which is my unique journey and it can't be anybody else's. There's certainly a lot of advantages that come with the wisdom of growing older and having more experience. But as you said before, it's interesting to see how people might seek our support when we have a certain amount of experience, perhaps thinking that our support will be different to that of somebody with less experience, less practical experience. But I don't really think that the number of births we attend determines the quality that we offer, of the care that we offer or how we doula or, it's not even really about that. It's more about the interpersonal skills, I think, and the capacity to just build a rapport with somebody and trust when it's a good connection and when it's not, and sort of be able to hold space for people to explore all the themes and just accompany them and witness them and validate the experience. And, there's so many roles that people have that aren't doulas that would have, that would have a lot of emphasis on all of these qualities as well. So, of course, most of us come from different backgrounds and we bring our previous experiences and things to enrich this work. But we're all different, which is why I started this podcast, because I'm curious about the story.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to our episode.
The last person I spoke to, she's a brand new doula and hasn't attended a birth yet. So I'm sort of enjoying speaking to people in, the vast spectrum of birth keeping. Okay, so moving towards listening to this voice inside that's more about supporting somebody really holistically, including the spiritual support and into your practice already to enrich that. That sounds really beautiful. I look forward to seeing how that unfolds as well. Do you have any thoughts, Emily, or any advice? I don't know if advice is the right word. Any thoughts that you'd like to give to emerging doulas who may be already starting in a doula business or considering moving into doula work or birth support? Yeah, any thoughts for anyone from any angle or any perspective at all from your experience?
Yeah, I guess all tying it into my story and what we've spoken about, it's trusting, you can call yourself a doula, even if you're not a birth doula and attending births. There's lots of ways to doula and provide that. I really think a doula is someone who provides compassionate, emotional care and support at times of transition. And so, that's not always a birth. It's all different. Especially on the reproductive spectrum, there's all different kinds of things that happen to women's bodies that can require that care and that witnessing. So I think it's really easy to doubt yourself at the beginning as a doula. So I think, trusting that, it's not about acquiring skills. I don't think. I think it's deepening your self-understanding. I think self-reflection is a big part of it, and making sure that you're providing that compassion and care to yourself. Probably my biggest piece of advice. And that it doesn't have to look a certain way. I think as all the people you're going to interview, it will show that, there's no one way to be a doula or look like a doula. You don't have to wear certain clothes or live in a certain place or, do a certain number of births per year. There's lots of different ways, and there's such a need for it, I think, too. So, please just go for it. If you're being called to be with women at any point along this spectrum, go for it.
Definitely it's a calling, isn't it? Most people speak of it as a calling. And so if it's calling, then you've got to answer. It's going to keep calling until you answer. But I love how you say that it doesn't have to look a certain way, and it can be very easy, I think, for people emerging in this space to be overwhelmed and to be intimidated and to have, a lack of confidence and to feel, inclined to compare with others and then have the imposter syndrome set in and all of this. But we're all offering different things and we're all suited to different people, and there's space for everyone. And there's a great demand, like you said, there's a great demand, and it's a growing demand. So we definitely need more people supporting birth and bringing all the different, it's impossible to imagine even the different approaches and skills that the different birth keepers can bring to this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why people and families and women choose you. It's because of who you are. It's not because of your years of experience. I mean, sometimes that's people's surface energy, why they're choosing it. But I think, deep down, people choose you because you're you and they want you
and how
to be
you make
there.
it real. Exactly. I find sometimes people ask me on discovery calls questions like, how many births have you attended? And I think it's the kind of question that's the kind of generic question that they've found online that they should ask maybe when they're interviewing a doula. But yeah, it's not like the answer to that question is not going to give any insight as to the quality of care and relationship that we may have. So I think that's if anybody's listening who is an expecting parent and interested to hear about different doulas, yeah, I would certainly encourage you to concentrate and to focus on the connection. That's really what it comes down to. And as we've been talking, we all bring different things, but it's about the connection. That's really the fundamental thing. So if somebody's been to 400 births, but you don't feel a great connection with them, trust your instinct. It's about the connection.
Absolutely. Well, I always remind my families too that like we choose you as well. Like we might say, no, we don't want to work with you, and you're going to find a different doula that will be the right doula for you. Yeah, it's a relationship that goes both ways, and you both want to be willing to work with each other.
Absolutely. I love that last point that you brought up. I'm actually in the process at the moment I've had a call with somebody who I've decided I think it's not the best fit for a range of reasons, and I'm going to let her know that today. But that's been a process. I think that's a really great point that you've raised, that we choose the families as well, because when we are perhaps early in our doula business, it might feel more difficult to do that when we feel like we have to take on everybody. But it's so important to be true to our inner knowing and true to our intuition and true to whether the connection is really there or not, and not forcing it, because if it's not really an authentic connection, for me personally, it's been a process. It's been an experience, and I have been through working with somebody that I had some red flags about that wasn't a good connection, but I persevered anyway. And it came out in different ways that it just wasn't a good connection, and it wasn't about me and it wasn't about her. It just was the dynamic. And I learned that the hard way. And that's good, because I learned that and needed to learn that. So do we always need to learn things the hard way? I'm not sure.
I think, maybe you learn it in a deeper way when it's the hard way, but no, not always, I guess. It'd be nice if someone had told me that, I think, at the beginning, that, you don't have to do a certain number, and it's your choice as well if you want to work with people or not. And it's not, it's not anything personal, but and I say that, they don't have to choose me either. It goes both ways. Is the feeling there? If it's not, you're going to find it with somebody else, and that's exciting. Keep exploring. It's not no hard feelings in there. Yeah.
Amazing. Do you have any other final thoughts or anything that you're doing that you'd like to share about with the listeners, or any questions or anything at all before we finish up?
My main thing at the moment is I'm shifting towards using Substack, which is like a kind of a blog newsletter site, and you can also record podcasts or just recordings. So I've shifted my newsletter that I send to my list over there, and I'm almost shifting from social media to there too. I'm putting much more energy into, this longer form of writing. And I record my voice reading the letters to people so people can listen to it if they want to as well. So that's where I put all my thinking of a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. I put a lot of that in there. It's not like a super polished newsletter. It's me working myself out usually and working out these big feelings.
I did read your newsletter last week, I think, or earlier this week, about having been away and exploring those lands and looking for those beautiful stones or rocks that you talked about.
Doula and Mother Mountain in New South Wales. So it's often about my journey of connecting to place and country, or working out this feeling of I need more spirit in my work. What does that mean? That kind of thing. So that's kind of where my energy has shifted in terms of my online presence, I guess.
So I'll share in the notes any links to your website or your Substack, if that's even, if that's a thing, a link to that. I'm not sure. It's new to me. But you can, send me the info and I'll share that in the notes. So all the best with that transition and with your ongoing work and your Friday. I hope you have a beautiful day. It's sunny here where I am. It's really nice. So thank you so much for your time, Emily, for creating some time to speak with me today. And it was lovely to hear about your story.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for doing this. I'm so excited.
Me too.
Bye.
Okay, so we can, the recording can finish there. Yeah. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Have a lovely day. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Emily today. It was really great to hear the story of how midwifery and supporting women in birth has was in Emily's DNA with so many of the women in her maternal lineage before her, supporting women as midwives, and to hear the stories that they held from their journeys. That's what stood out to me from this conversation today. I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you for joining me on the Whole Doula podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with Emily, you can find her contacts in the show notes today. And if you have any questions for her, I'm sure she would be pleased to answer them. Thanks so much for listening to the Whole Doula podcast with Mary Giordano. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation today. If so, please hit subscribe and consider leaving a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. Have a beautiful day.